Hey, y'all. Shout out to my dad for suggesting this one. Okay, for this fact of the day, I really have to start out with a promise. This fact of the day has a happy end. Really, I promise. We're going to have to wade through a fair bit of darkness in order to make it to that light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a darkness that needs to be remembered so that we, as human beings, can do better and make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. That having been said, if any of this fact makes you sad, that's good. It means you're a human being, and hopefully the fact at the end will be enough to make you smile again. However, before we begin our story, we need a fact recap. This fact of the day assumes that you have heard and remember a fact of the day from back in February. And since back then I was doing these in person, I don't have a previous video to point you at. So, really quickly, here was the fact of the day from February 19th, 1942. Executive Order 9066. Issued soon after the Empire of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor that brought America into World War II, this order by the president forced people of Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast, including American citizens, to be rounded up, processed, and placed in large internment camps based only on their ethnicity. Just to be absolutely crystal clear, none of the people locked up had been convicted of a crime, and most of the people locked up were Americans. Not people who were born in Japan, but people who were every bit as much an American as me, my children, or any other member of this nation. One easy way to see that is to look at these guys. These guys are a part of the 442nd Infantry Regiment, and they are the most decorated unit in the history of the American military. This unit consisted entirely of Japanese Americans, American citizens whose parents had moved to the United States in search of a better life and who, in a 2 year period, won 18,143 military awards, including 21 Medals of Honor, the highest award our nation has to give. And while they were fighting for America, America kept their families back home locked up in camps. That's your recap. So shove that knowledge to the side of your brain somewhere, but don't let it fall out because you're going to need it later. All right, let's get to what happened on May 2nd in the year 1945. Now, you all know that I am like the king of saying that things are complicated. Life is complex, and the more you learn about this amazingly nuanced world that we live in, the more you start to understand just how complicated things are. That's all true. Now, here's something that's not complicated. I'm going to teach you a very simple math equation. Nazis equal bad. Not it's complicated, not, well, from certain points of view. No. The Nazi Party, which controlled Germany before and during World War II, were at least as evil as you've always been taught that they were. The specific evil that we'll look at today is this place called Dachau. Dachau was a concentration camp, and in its time it held many, many thousands of prisoners. Jewish people, Germans who criticized the Nazi government, people from countries that Germany was attacking, and many, many others. The sign you can read on the gate says, Arbeit macht frei, which means work will make you free. That was a lie. The people in the camp were used for slave labor to support the Wehrmacht, the German war machine. It was a central camp with almost 100 subcamps attached to it, and according to the Nazis' own records, more than 32,000 prisoners were killed here. Many thousands more were murdered without even having their names written down, with their bodies often disposed of in this building, which contained ovens large enough to cook human bodies down to ash. Thankfully, by April of 1945, the Nazi war machine was falling apart, and the soon to be victorious Allied armies were smashing their way into Germany from both sides. The commander of the camp, knowing that the war was lost, asked permission to surrender the camp and himself to the Allies, whose armies were fast approaching. This man, Gestapo chief Heinrich Himmler, wrote back, responding, "No prisoners shall be allowed to fall into the hands of the enemy alive." See, at this point, it was very clear that Germany was going to lose the war, and the last thing the Nazis wanted were living witnesses to the millions who had already been murdered. What happened next was something that happened in many of the concentration camps towards the end of the war. There were too many prisoners to kill in the time they had left before the American army showed up. So on April 26, 1945, all the prisoners were rounded up and the Dachau death march began. The prisoners were moved south towards Austria. Prisoners were told that anyone who did not march or who could not keep up would be shot. Just 3 days later, on April 29th, the American army arrived at the camp, but they were too late. The prisoners were gone. It was cold, and there was snow on the ground. The prisoners didn't have warm clothing. They weren't given enough to eat. Their guards were terrified at the thought of losing the war, and in their fear, they were ready to shoot anyone who stepped out of line. The death march made it all the way to this exact spot, and no farther, because there they were intercepted by the 442nd Infantry Regiment of the American Army. The German Guard stood no chance against the most honored unit in American military history, and they were quickly captured. As soon as that was done, the Americans immediately did everything they could to help the prisoners. They shared their own clothes and blankets to protect against the cold. They shared their food, though the freed prisoners had gone with so little food for so long that they had to be careful not to eat too much too fast. Nestled beside that little quiet road I showed you on the satellite map, there stands a memorial commemorating the place where the Dachau Death March came to an end. It's not big, it's not fancy, but it stands as a reminder of both some of the worst things that humans have ever done to one another, and the fact that this evil can be overcome. The thought I want to leave you with is that, in this case, the evil was overcome by Americans who, at the time, were so mistrusted because of their ethnic background that many of their families were locked up by their own government, even while they were fighting for their country against one of the most uncomplicatedly evil foes we've ever faced. Who you are isn't defined by the color of your skin or where your ancestors came from. These guys are all American heroes. And I thought today would be a good day to spend a moment remembering them, reflecting on the evil they helped to defeat, and thinking about the lessons that teaches us. Thanks for tuning in. As always, stay safe and stay healthy.